And what about those Paleozoics? Bro, you were in the Google.
Like, drawing cards? I mean, come on, Max C? Why is that card still banned? Let's bring it back to 5. If you'd like to see these live streams live, make sure to go down into the description and follow me on Twitch. Twitch.tv/BladeYGO. But with that, let's start the live analysis. So in today's analysis video, we're going to discuss, have we finally reached a good Yu-Gi-Oh format? Because let's be real here. This past year full of quarantine formats has not really been the best. The answer is a little weird because there are definitely problems with this format that I'll get to. Considering all this, let's get right in. Let's start by discussing the top 5 decks. This is in no specific order. I'm just going to go over what I think are the 5 best decks, but I'm also going to reference other decks. So starting off, 2 decks I think are clearly the best decks, quote unquote, is Tri-Brigade and Drytron. Tri-Brigade is the most represented deck, of course, and Drytron's just the highest ceiling deck. Personally, I think Drytron's the best deck. Just me as a player, I think when you have the highest ceiling in the format, most of the time that's the best deck. Now, obviously, from tournament to tournament, it's going to vary as to what the deck to play is. For example, if you want to do well at a very specific tournament, like a national level, maybe you want to play Tri-Brigade because you get to play more hand traps. We have Prank Kids, which I think is pretty, like, I'm pretty confident in saying it's the 3rd best deck. So I guess this is my order, but it's up to debate as to which order you think it's going to be. But Prank Kids is really good right now. I mean, obviously, you have your 1-card combo. Your 1-card engine gets you so much. It gets you so many bodies your opponent has to deal with. It gets you this double Raigeki effect, which is so strong in so many matchups. One reason I think Salamangreat shouldn't be on this list is the card quality of the current decks are just better than Salad and Striker. Like, to give you context as to why I say this, when we look at a deck like Salamangreat, Salamangreat has Sunlight Wolf. You have to go through extra steps in order to reincarnation link it, and if you do reincarnation link it, you're able to add back 2 cards from your grave, which, okay, that's great and all, but Prank Kids, you go through so many less steps, and then you get Dodo Doodle Doo, which adds a spell and trap from your deck to your hand, adds back 2 extra cards from your grave to the hand, and then you just gain even more advantage from there. I mean, the engine for Prank Kids, I just think, is so much higher quality than something like Salad. Then we get into the discussion of Virtual World, as I would argue is like the 4th best deck right now, I guess. Virtual World is definitely a solid contender. Shen Shen is very hard for some decks to deal with. For example, if you expect a lot of Prank Kids at a specific tournament, Virtual World's a great counter pick. It does have its flaws because Virtual World is a lot more bricky than most other decks. I think the percentage is like 1 in every 6 games you're going to brick. But besides that, you know, I think Virtual World is still a very strong deck. Its grind game is very strong. It has a lot of different things going for it, for sure. And then the last deck may surprise you, may not surprise you. I think Dragon Link is number 5. Dragon Link is still really good. They hit Striker Dragon, banned Elpy. But, I mean, the deck's still playable. Hieratic Seal is such a crazy Yu-Gi-Oh card. Anytime you can play that card, typically it's going to be really strong. And so we're seeing that here with Dragon Link, where even though they're not as powerful as they once were, Hieratic Steel plus Chamber plus all the different advantages you get with playing Dragon Link just gets you a ton of advantage for free. And it's also a combo deck that can play hand traps. And this kind of ties into the next point of discussion I want to discuss, which is the good in the format. Let's talk about the good. And hand traps I'm going to discuss in the bad because there's an argument about it that is very relevant right now because all of the decks right now, except Drytron, somewhat rely on hand traps a bit. Like, for example, Tri-Brigade and Prank Kids are decent at going second, if not good at going second, because you can play a ton of hand traps. But let's talk about the good. So the good. Every deck is terrible. It's gonna sound weird that I say that because, I mean, you know, it's like these are the top 5 decks, right? But at the same time, when we compare the power level of the current decks to that of the past year or so, I mean, let's look at Adamantipator. Adamantipator is arguably going to go down as one of the most powerful decks, if not one of the strongest decks ever printed. It did some incredible things. Block Dragon was absurd. The grind game was unreal. it was a very strong Yu-Gi-Oh deck. We have Dragon Link at full power, was setting up Destruction Sword combos, basically an FTK deck. You had Infernoble, which actually was an FTK deck. If you went first with Infernoble, it was very hard for you to lose that game just because it was so easy to push through hand traps in that deck. I mean, these decks and many others like Calamities and Virtual World, for just as an example, all these decks were so powerful. When we compare that to the decks now, I mean, Tri-Brigade, Celestial, thank you for the follow. Tri-Brigade obviously isn't like the weakest deck ever printed, right? But clearly it's not going to be as strong as Calamities in Virtual World. Sure, you get to end on Appaloosa, but you get Appaloosa negates, but Virtual Worlds is just a straight, with Calamities is just a straight up floodgate. So clearly Virtual World with Calamities was better than Appaloosa in Tri-Brigade. And just in general, the power levels are so much weaker. For example, you have to somewhat rely on hand traps for Tri-Brigade to break boards. Obviously, if you're playing Tri-Zoo, you get access to Zeus and whatnot. But like generally speaking, Tri-Zoo isn't like the strongest deck ever. It's like good right now, but in a different format, this deck may have just been complete garbage. Which is what I'm basically saying about last year's decks. Versus like the decks now and everything. So I think the decks right now are clearly not as strong as they once were, but that's not a bad thing. In fact, I think that's actually a good thing for the game. The decks have been so powerful, it felt like every deck was somewhat of an FTK. And because everything was an FTK, it's not going to be fun. Obviously, in Yu-Gi-Oh, we have the luxury of having things like hand traps. And hand traps really do help out for going second in just general gameplay. But without hand traps, what was I going to say? Just like in general, the fact that every deck is so much worse right now is a good thing because it means if your engine is strong enough, you don't need to play hand traps. If your engine isn't strong enough, you can play hand traps. And that means that every deck is essentially a hand trap or hand trap list deck, but with like different spices of life. So for example, Prank Kids versus Tri-Brigade, those two decks are somewhat similar in that they have a low engine count, but they have a lot of room for hand traps. But at the same time, they do different things. Like Prank Kids is really strong because it's your one card combo. Every single Prank Kid name is a combo. You have a ways of pushing through with Polymerization and Pandemonium. So Prank Kids is very strong. Tri-Brigade is very strong. Then we need to talk about decks like Drytron, where you don't actually have to play hand traps in Drytron because the engine is just so powerful as is. Against these lower ceiling decks, you're able to push through boards without the need of hand traps. And that's where I think this format is really good and very comparable to a lot of other strong, very fun formats. A good example is 2019. I mean, we had Salamangreat and Sky Striker, which both decks wanted to play hand traps because their engine wasn't strong enough to win alone. But these other decks like Orcus somewhat because they somewhat played hand traps. But then you also have Danger Thunder, which their engine was so strong as is, they didn't need to play any hand traps. So I think this like counterbalance is really effective instead of a format where it's primarily there are so many combo decks in the format that you are forced to play hand traps in order to stop other combo decks. So I think this dynamic of differences and all of that is very effective for the game. But yeah, so getting back to the other thing I want to discuss, which is both deck building and technical play is rewarded. I think what's so important about different formats is that you want to make sure there's obviously going to be There's obviously going to be formats where sometimes one is prioritized over the other. If you're playing a technical play format, you got to make sure your technical play is on point. Same thing with deck building if the format calls for that. But right now, when you have a balance of both, I think that's the most rewarding kind of form. Now, I haven't discussed Dragoon at all today in this video because, honestly, Dragoon is not a problem most of the time. The reason Dragoon is a problem now is because Drytron is so high ceiling, but there are so many hand traps in the format being thrown at it by decks like Tri-Brigade and Prank Kid, that if you eat 2 hand traps and make a Dragoon, which basically happens in every hand, In this situation, how do you deal with a Dragoon in a deck like Tri-Brigade or Prank Kids? I mean, there are ways, don't get me wrong. For example, in Tri-Brigade, you can normal summon a Zodiac. But then if you normal summon a Zodiac, you go Battle Phase, attack directly, make a Zeus, you double Zeus, get rid of the Dragoon. What are you going to do after that? For example, you could go Kuras Nerval, which, okay, sure. If you draw a Zodiac plus Kuras plus Nerval or Kid or like whatever, right? Sure, you're good at the game. You're able to break the board and establish something afterwards. But if you don't open that specific hand, most of the time you just can't deal with the Dragoon at all. And honestly, I think that's one of the big things with Drytron right now, which is making it so much better than it should be. The resiliency it has, as is already pretty strong. I mean, one hand trap most of the time is not enough to deal with the deck, but then adding Dragoon to the deck makes it so that you can get hand trapped multiple times and still end on something strong enough to where you're not concerned. Consensus. Personally, I think this is a good format. I think, in fact, I mean, I actually do think it's a really good format. There's one deck that's like an FTK type deck, and that's obviously Drytron. But besides that, every other deck you can deal with arguably Engine alone. Obviously, decks like Tri-Brigade and Prank Kids are going to realistically draw hand traps against you, and that's just bound to happen. But generally speaking, even without hand traps, you can deal with boards without the need of hand traps, which I think is great. For the first time in a while, we're not having multiple decks ending on Calamities, ending on Buster Lock with like a ton of other negates. Like, it's actually a format where the decks are a lot more fair, a lot more lower ceiling, and I think that's just great for the game overall. Every deck is really equal. I obviously discussed the 5 decks from earlier that I think are the best decks, but that doesn't mean the other decks in the format are bad. Striker, if you're one of the 3 players that can play that deck, being Cody Angeloff, Ryan Yu, and Joshua Oosters, besides those 3, everyone else is ass with the deck. That's for legal purposes, that's a joke. But generally speaking, I think this is a great format. Salamangreat's also playable. There's a ton of other decks like Shaddoll, which I think is not bad at all. And yeah, that's my consensus on this current format.
Okay. I'd just like to start off by saying, Drytron best deck.
Facts, of course.
It's better than every other deck.
True.
But for all the people that like hand traps and being a nerd, they just play Prank Kids, you know? And they just hand trap your Drytron deck to death. And then like, you're like, okay, fine, I'll just pass. They only have 1 card in hand. Oops, nope, normal summon fancy. The game is over. Like, bro. Like, they need to ban Prank Kids, bro. Like,
True.
just ban Meow Meow. Like, take us back to 2018 when Prank Kids was a fair deck. Like, they need 2 Prank Kids and a Poly in order to play. Like, make them have to play double summon again, bro. Remember when Prank Kids played double summon? Like, bro,
I can't say I recall. I can't say I recalled that specifically.
Bro, you were in the gulag. My bad, bro. I forgot. You just got to the meta. But it's alright,
Yeah.
I still love you. But yeah, bro, back in the good old days. And what about those Paleozoics, man? Those cards are broken, bro. Like, they literally have a Book of Moon, but it's a trap. So
that is
slower,
true.
It's a trap. Like, it's broken, dude. And
True.
Then they have a spell.
Mm-hmm.
They have a trap card that destroys other trap cards. Like, that's insane. And then it summons itself. What the hell is that? And then they turn into a frog. How does a fossil turn into a frog? What is this? Some Digimon stuff? Like, come on, dude. Like, this is insane. Like, I've had enough of it. Like, this game is literally becoming unplayable, bro. Unplayable.
Honestly.
I remember when 2 warriors meant I won the game. Now I have 2 Drytrons, and like I can get hand trapped and lose. Like, let's go back to Goki format when the game was peak, when the game actually meant something. You know?
True. Let's regress. Let's regress back to the fossil era. You know,
Exactly.
the good old Paleozoic Goki matchup. What a classic.
Exactly. What a classic.
Like,
what about Master Plan? Like, that card is fair. Like, bring it back to 4. I don't care. That card sucks. Like, what is it? Like,
honestly,
a Spiral monster?
What has Spiral ever done, you know?
Exactly. Like, the Spiral archetype, you mean like Nephesis? Like, those cards suck. Like,
True.
that field spell that, like, searches normal monsters? Like, bro, bring Master Plan back. They need all the support they can get.
You have to guess the top card of your opponent's deck? How is that ever
Exactly.
gonna be tier 1?
Exactly.
Let alone tier 0?
Bro. Like, come on, dude, a shit mechanic, bro. Like, it's all about guessing and luck. Like, bro. Like, and all the danger monsters, take them off the list, bro. Nobody cares
Uh-huh.
about those cards. Like, come on, dude,
True.
it's all about archetypes nowadays. Like,
True.
dangers are too generic, bro. Like, they don't do anything. What do? Just summon themselves and replace themselves? They're literally just vanillas, bro. Like, who cares about drawing
Honestly.
cards?
And
Who cares about them not being once per turn? Doesn't even matter, bro.
like drawing cards. I mean, come on, Max C. Why is that card still banned? Like, let's
Exactly. Why
bring
is
it back
Maxi
to
still
5.
banned? Bring it back to 5. It's literally roaches. You can just spray roaches. Like, come on, dude.
You
Fair
can
card.
spray bug spray on it.
Exactly. Like, for
God
real.
damn.
Like,
Well,
come on, man.
well, that's been your 3 minutes, Jib. Any final words?
Flendery's best deck in 3 months. Dab.